Maps don't lie. That's what we're taught. Cartographers measure, surveyors confirm, satellites verify. For centuries, these systems have guided ships through fog, planes through storms, nations through territorial disputes. Maps are built on mathematics, observation, evidence. They are the most trusted records of what exists on Earth. Except sometimes, they're wrong. Tonight, we're examining 3 islands that appeared on official maps for decades, some for centuries, then vanished without explanation. The maps claimed they were there. The ocean proved they weren't. One of them is lying. Bermeja Island. In 1539, Spanish cartographer Alonso de Santa Cruz catalogued every island in the Yucatan region. One entry stood out, Bermeja. He described its precise location at coordinates 22 degrees 33 minutes north, 91 degrees 22 minutes west, roughly 100 miles northwest of the Yucatan Peninsula. The name came from its appearance, Bermeja, Spanish for reddish. From a distance, the small island looked blondish or reddish against the blue Gulf waters. A year later, Alonso de Chavez recorded the exact coordinates in Espejo de Navegantes, a navigational guide used by Spanish explorers. Not an approximation, not an estimate, exact coordinates with detailed descriptions. The island appeared on British maps, German maps, Mexican maps. For 4 centuries, cartographers from different nations, working independently, placed Bermeja in the same location. It survived the transition from hand-drawn charts to printed atlases. It appeared in the 1921 Geographic Atlas of the Mexican Republic, published by the Mexican government itself. Then came 1997. The Mexican and United States governments began negotiating boundaries in the Gulf of Mexico. A stretch of international waters called Hoyos de Doña sat between their territories, and under it lay an estimated 22.5 billion barrels of oil. Mexico's maritime claim depended on one geographic feature, Bermeja Island. If it existed, Mexico gained access to massive offshore reserves. International law grants nations exclusive economic zones extending 200 nautical miles from their territories. Bermeja sat exactly where Mexico needed it. The Mexican government dispatched a survey team. They sailed to the coordinates. Every historical record matched. They found open ocean, no island, no reef, no shoal. Water depth measured over 1,400 meters. They searched the surrounding area. Nothing. In 2009, Mexico launched 3 separate expeditions. The National Autonomous University of Mexico deployed advanced sonar equipment and seafloor mapping technology. They scanned hundreds of square kilometers. The seafloor showed no remnants of land, no geological formations that could have been an island, no evidence anything had ever existed at those coordinates. The ocean floor was undisturbed sediment. If an island had sunk or eroded, traces would remain, coral formations, rock deposits, sediment patterns. The UNAM report found none of it. 400 years of maps, precise coordinates, multiple independent confirmations, all pointed to an island that left no physical evidence of ever existing. Investigators considered cartographic error. Perhaps the first mapmaker invented Bermeja, a deliberate fiction to mislead rival navigators. Countries in the 16th and 17th centuries published maps with false islands to protect trade routes. One strategically placed phantom island could dissuade competitors from exploring valuable territories. But Bermeja wasn't marked randomly. Spanish navigators described its reddish color, a detail specific enough to suggest they saw something. Multiple nations confirmed its location independently. British, German, Mexican cartographers all placed it within the same coordinates. A fabrication wouldn't survive 4 centuries of maritime navigation. Ships passed through those waters regularly. Someone would have noticed. Someone would have said something. No one did, not for 400 years. A second possibility emerged, geological destruction. Perhaps Bermeja sank beneath the waves, Rising sea levels, erosion, tectonic shifts could have submerged the island over centuries. Since 1844, British maps listed Bermeja as lying 60 fathoms, roughly 360 feet, below the surface. The 2009 seafloor surveys found water depth exceeding 4,600 feet. Islands don't sink that deep without leaving scars. Geologist Israel Baxin Martinez examined the seabed data. Islands that erode or sink leave remnants, coral reefs, rock formations, sediment layers showing disrupted geology. The ocean floor at the coordinates showed pristine, undisturbed sediment. No crater, no collapse, no debris field. The seabed looked untouched, as if nothing had ever existed there, as if it had been erased. In November 2008, 6 Mexican senators raised the question no one wanted to ask out loud. What if Bermeja didn't sink? What if someone made it disappear? The theory was dismissed immediately as conspiracy, as paranoia. But consider what was at stake. 22.5 billion barrels of oil, billions of dollars in drilling rights, an entire maritime boundary determined by one island's existence. Mexico needed Bermeja to exist. The United States needed it gone. And it was gone, completely, perfectly, not a trace. Destroying an island measuring 80 square kilometers would require massive explosives. It would be visible from shore. Seismographs would detect it. Satellites would photograph it. Someone would see the ships, the equipment, the operation. Debris would scatter across the seafloor. Evidence would exist somewhere. Instead, silence. Clean ocean floor. No witnesses, no records, no debris, nothing. The official explanation became cartographic error, repeated across centuries. A mistake copied from map to map until it became accepted truth. But that explanation requires believing 400 years of navigators working independently across multiple nations, all made the same mistake. All described the same reddish island, all placed it at the same coordinates. Or it requires believing something worse, that you can erase an island so thoroughly that even the ocean floor forgets it existed. That you can remove 80 square kilometers of land and leave behind only questions and silence and water where maps promised solid ground. Bermeja isn't missing. Missing implies it was lost, misplaced, waiting to be found. Bermeja was removed from reality itself, and no one can prove how. Bermeja's disappearance rests on an impossible contradiction. Documented existence versus physical absence. The coordinates were precise, the descriptions detailed, the cartographic record extensive. Yet 3 modern expeditions using advanced technology found nothing, not ruins, not remnants, not even geological anomalies suggesting land once existed there. The Mexican government officially removed Bermeja from its maritime charts in 2009. Without physical evidence, Mexico couldn't claim the island in boundary negotiations. The United States secured rights to the disputed oil reserves. What would solve this mystery? Finding the island, or finding proof it never existed? Records showing the original error, documentation of the fabrication, evidence the coordinates were misinterpreted. Neither has emerged. Maps show Bermeja. The ocean shows nothing. The gap between those two facts remains unexplained. Until someone produces evidence explaining how an island appeared on maps for 4 centuries without existing, or finds geological proof it once stood where records claim, Bermeja remains impossible. A place that cartographers saw, navigators recorded, and governments relied upon, but no one can locate. Bermeja vanished from maps after failing to appear where coordinates promised, but our next case is different. The island was confirmed by satellite technology. Sandy Island appeared on Google Earth, in scientific databases, on naval charts used by research vessels. Then Australian scientists sailed directly through it and found water nearly a mile deep. Sandy Island. On November 22, 2012, the RV Southern Surveyor departed Brisbane, Australia, on a routine 25-day expedition. The research vessel carried marine geologists from the University of Sydney studying tectonic plate movement in the Coral Sea. They planned to map sections of the ocean floor between Australia and New Caledonia. Chief Scientist Dr. Maria Seaton stared at two screens showing the same coordinates. One screen showed land, the other showed an abyss. Their scientific maps displayed an island at coordinates 19 degrees 13 minutes south, 159 degrees 56 minutes east, a landmass roughly 24 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide. The general bathymetric chart of the oceans reported an elevation of 1 meter above sea level at that location. Google Earth displayed it as a black polygon. The World Vector Shoreline Database, the standard global coastline dataset used by the scientific community, confirmed solid ground. The ship's navigation system showed water, deep water. Seaton ordered the ship to the coordinates. The crew watched the screens. One showed an island growing closer. The other showed depth readings climbing. 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters, 1,400 meters. They sailed toward land that their instruments said was drowning them in an ocean nearly a mile deep. Crew member Stephen Micklethwaite stood on deck as they reached the coordinates. He could see the horizon, clear sky, flat water, no land. He looked down at the screen. The digital map showed the ship's icon sitting directly on top of Sandy Island. The island was beneath them, under their hull. They were standing on it. But they weren't. They were floating over 1,488 meters of water. Nearly a mile of empty ocean beneath the keel. The ship drifted through where Sandy Island should have been. The screens didn't update. The database didn't correct itself. The digital map kept showing land while the ocean stayed empty. Two realities occupying the same space, refusing to reconcile. Later, when the Australian Hydrographic Service mapped the seafloor, they confirmed minimum depth of 1,488 meters. Maximum depth of 2,353 meters. No shallow reef, no submerged land mass, no geological formation. Just an abyss deep enough to swallow multiple skyscrapers stacked on top of each other. Sandy Island existed in every database. It appeared in global navigation systems, scientific terrain models, satellite mapping programs. Research institutions had used it in their datasets for decades. Governments had relied on it for maritime boundaries. It was real in every system that mattered, except reality. In reality, there was only water and the vertigo of watching your instruments lie to you while you float over nothing. The mystery deepened when researchers traced Sandy Island's history. It first appeared on maps in 1876, recorded by the whaling ship Velocity. The captain reported seeing heavy breakers and sandy islets at those coordinates. This sighting was added to the 1879 Australian Directory, a guide for maritime navigation. But there was an earlier record. In 1774, Captain James Cook charted a sandy wise in his Pacific Ocean maps. His island snaked between latitudes 19 and 20 degrees south, longitudes 163 degrees 50 minutes and 164 degrees 15 minutes east, hundreds of miles east of where the modern Phantom Island appeared. Cook's coordinates placed his sighting near the actual Chesterfield Islands and reefs around New Caledonia. His map was accurate. Somewhere between Cook's 1774 chart and the Velocity's 1876 sighting, the island migrated west on maps. By 1908, a British Admiralty chart showed Sandy Island at the coordinates that would persist into the digital age. The coordinates where the Southern Surveyor found nothing but deep ocean in 2012. The French Hydrographic Service removed Sandy Island from their nautical charts in 1974 after a flying reconnaissance campaign found no island. The Australian Hydrographic Service deleted it in 1985. Both agencies informed other national hydrographic services around the world that the island did not exist. But Sandy Island lived on. It remained in the World Vector Shoreline Database. When that database became the foundation for digital mapping systems in the 1990s and 2000s, the Phantom Island propagated into every system that used it. Google Maps, Google Earth, National Geographic databases, scientific terrain models, marine navigation software. An error from a whaling ship in 1876 infected every digital map created 130 years later. By 2000, Amateur radio enthusiasts planning an expedition to the Chesterfield Islands noticed the discrepancy. Sandy Island appeared on some maps but not others. They sailed to the coordinates and confirmed what the French Navy had documented decades earlier. No island existed. They posted their findings online. 12 years later, the scientific community finally noticed. Researchers considered the possibility of a cartographic trap. Mapmakers sometimes place fictitious features, trap streets, phantom towns, to catch copyright violators. If someone copies the map, the fake feature proves the theft. The Australian Hydrographic Service rejected this immediately. You don't put trap islands on nautical charts. Ocean charts aren't copyright protection, they're survival tools. Inventing hazards or land masses endangers ships. People die from navigational errors. No hydrographic service would deliberately create false data that could sink vessels or strand crews. But someone did, or something did. The island appeared on maps anyway. The second theory offered a mundane explanation: pumice rafts. Volcanic eruptions produce pumice, a light rock that floats for months before breaking apart. In 2004, researchers tracked massive pumice rafts from a Tonga volcano that traveled over 3,000 kilometers across the Pacific. The trajectory passed within 20 kilometers of Sandy Island's coordinates. Perhaps the Velocity in 1876 encountered a pumice field and mistook it for land. Perhaps a massive floating rock formation, seen from a distance, resembled a sandy island. Wind and currents in that region funnel pumice between Fiji and New Caledonia. The pumice raft superhighway, researchers called it, passed directly through Sandy Island's location. One sighting, one mistake, that's all it would take. But then explain why the island stayed on maps for 136 years. Other ships sailed through the same coordinates, the pumice dispersed within months. Yet decade after decade, the island remained, not marked as doubtful, not questioned. Solid land on every chart. The third explanation emerged after the Southern Surveyor returned. Digitization error. When hydrographic services converted paper charts to digital formats in the 1980s and 1990s, someone might have misread a smudge or a printing defect as an island. One keystroke error, one pixel out of place. The computer accepted it as truth. And once it entered the digital realm, it became unkillable. The World Vector Shoreline Database inherited it. Google Earth imported it. National Geographic copied it. Scientific terrain models absorbed it. Each system trusted the previous system. Each database assumed someone else had verified it. The error multiplied, spreading through every connected system like a virus no one knew existed. By the time the French Hydrographic Service deleted it in 1974, it was too late. The deletion never propagated. The correction never spread. The island stayed alive in databases that no one thought to update, persisting in the digital infrastructure that modern navigation relies on. The crew of the Southern Surveyor didn't discover an island was missing. They discovered something worse, that the systems we've built to understand reality can sustain their own reality. That databases can contradict the physical world, and the databases will win because we trust them more than our eyes. Sandy Island proved that the map doesn't just fail to match the territory. Sometimes the map creates territory that doesn't exist, and every system built on top of that map sees the same phantom, the same lie, the same land where there's only water. You sail through it and the screen still shows solid ground beneath you. You watch the ocean stretch empty to the horizon, and the database insists you're standing on an island. Two realities, both confirmed by instruments, both impossible. One of them is real, you just don't know which one. The question isn't whether Sandy Island exists. Scientists sailed through it, seafloor mapping confirmed, deep ocean. The island definitively does not exist, and probably never did. The mystery is how a non-existent island survived into the satellite age. Between 1974 and 2012, multiple agencies deleted Sandy Island from official charts. The French Hydrographic Service, the Australian Hydrographic Service, amateur radio operators, all confirmed its absence. The information was available. Hydrographic services shared their findings internationally. Yet Google added it to Google Maps. National Geographic included it in their databases. Scientific institutions used it in research. The World Vector Shoreline Database, created by the US. Defense Mapping Agency, as a definitive global coastline reference, listed it as solid land. No single person was responsible. No deliberate deception occurred. The island simply persisted through bureaucratic inertia and database inheritance. Each system trusted the previous system. Each map copied from earlier maps. The error became self-perpetuating. On November 26, 2012, 4 days after the Southern Surveyor's discovery, Google removed Sandy Island from Google Maps. On November 29th, National Geographic officially struck it from their databases. The Phantom Island that had survived 136 years vanished in less than a week once media attention forced action. What remains unexplained? How many other Phantom Islands exist in our mapping systems? How many errors from 19th century whaling ships still contaminate modern databases? How many places appear on maps that would vanish if someone actually sailed there to check? Sandy Island proved that in the age of satellites and GPS, we still trust maps more than we verify reality. Sandy Island disappeared when scientists finally checked if it existed, but our next case is different. People claimed to visit it. Sailors reported landing on its shores. Captains described its features in detail. For 5 centuries, Hy-Brasil appeared on maps west of Ireland, visible one day every 7 years, then vanishing into mist. Hy-Brasil. In 1325, Genoese cartographer Angelino Dulcer produced a Portolan chart of the Atlantic Ocean. West of Ireland, he marked an island labelled Brasil. The name appeared again in 1436 on Andrea Bianco's Venetian map, this time as Insula de Brasil, attached to one of a group of islands in the Atlantic. The island had a distinctive feature. Every map showed it as a perfect circle, with a channel running east-west through its centre. Not an irregular landmass, not a rough coastline, a geometric circle, as if drawn with a compass, as if it wasn't natural. In 1480 and 1481, expeditions left Bristol specifically to find it. John Jay Jr. spent 2 months searching before returning empty-handed. The ships Trinity and George followed a year later. They found nothing. Then came the encounters. In 1674, Captain John Nisbet sailed from France toward Ireland. A fog descended, thick, absolute, the kind that erases horizons. When it lifted, his ship sat dangerously close to rocks. The crew had been in familiar waters. Now nothing looked familiar. They anchored in 3 fathoms of water, 18 feet deep. 4 sailors rowed ashore to determine their location. Nisbet's account describes what they found: an elderly figure who offered them gold and silver without speaking. The crew reported creatures, large, black, moving wrong, not like animals they recognized, and a structure inland, something Nisbet called a castle, occupied by someone the crew refused to describe in detail. They used the word magician in their report, but reading the account, you sense they used that word because they didn't have a better one. When the sailors returned to the ship and pushed off from shore, they looked back. The fog rolled in again. The island vanished. Not gradually, completely, as if it had never been there. In 1684, Roderick O'Flaherty documented another account. He interviewed a man named Morog Oli, who claimed he spent 2 days on Hy-Brasil. Oli described seeing the Aran Islands, Golem Head and other familiar Western Irish landmarks from the Phantom Islands shore. He recognized places he knew from the mainland. But when he described the island itself, his account became vague. He mentioned inhabitants but couldn't describe them clearly. He spoke of structures but struggled to explain their construction. He said the place felt wrong, like everything there existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. In 1872, antiquarian T.J. Westrop claimed his third visit to the island. He'd seen it twice before and brought his mother and friends this time as witnesses. According to Westrop, they watched Hy-Brasil rise from the ocean, not appear from mist, but physically emerge from the water. It stayed visible for a brief period. Then it descended again, sinking beneath the waves as they watched. These weren't vague legends. The accounts included specific details: the depth of the surrounding water, physical measurements, the view back toward Ireland. Multiple witnesses across 3 centuries, each describing encounters that felt wrong in ways they couldn't fully articulate, each describing an island that behaved like no island should. Hy-Brasil persisted on maps longer than almost any other phantom island. It appeared in Spanish charts, Portuguese maps, British Admiralty documents. The locations varied, sometimes southwest of Ireland, sometimes west, sometimes northwest along the coast from County Cork to County Antrim. But the circular shape remained consistent. A 1595 map by Gerardus Mercator showed not one but 2 islands west of Ireland, Hy-Brasil and a second island called Demar. Both appeared at coordinates that now sit on the ocean floor, more than 600 feet below the surface. By the 18th century, cartographers began questioning its existence. A 1753 map by British cartographer Thomas Jeffreys showed the island but labelled it the imaginary Isle o' Brasil. The doubt had begun. In 1873, Hy-Brasil made its last appearance on official charts. After nearly 550 years of cartographic presence, it vanished from maps completely. But the physical searches continued. An 1870 paper read to the Geological Society of Ireland suggested Hy-Brasil might be the Porcupine Bank, a shoal discovered in 1862 about 200 kilometers west of Ireland. The bank's highest point sits roughly 200 meters below sea level. An 1830 chart had marked Brazil Rock at approximately that location. If Porcupine Bank was once above water, it would have been an island west of Ireland, visible from the coast during clear weather, matching the historical descriptions. Sea levels have risen significantly since the last ice age. Land masses that existed 12,000 years ago now lie submerged. The most straightforward explanation: Hy-Brasil was a myth that infected cartography. Irish folklore described an enchanted island west of Ireland, visible only one day every 7 years. Medieval map makers, hearing these stories, added the island to their charts without verification. Later cartographers copied it from earlier maps, perpetuating the error for centuries. But the claimed encounters didn't describe folklore. They described physical experiences that terrified the people who had them. Captain Nisbet's crew didn't report a magical paradise. They described a figure who gave them precious metals without communication. They described fauna that moved incorrectly. They described a structure inland occupied by someone they couldn't properly explain. When they tried to sail back to find it, they never could. The coordinates didn't work. The landmarks didn't match. The island had vanished completely. Morag O'Lee's account is worse. He claimed he spent 2 days there, 48 hours, and could see Ireland from the shore. He recognized specific landmarks, but when he tried to describe what he experienced on the island itself, his testimony became fragmented. He spoke of inhabitants, but couldn't describe their features. He mentioned structures, but couldn't explain how they were built. Reading his account, you get the sense he was describing something his mind couldn't process. Something that looked almost right, but wasn't. The second theory: atmospheric phenomena. Fata Morgana, a type of superior mirage, can make distant objects appear closer or create the illusion of land where none exists. When hot air sits above cold air over water, light bends. Islands appear to float. Land masses materialize that don't exist. Perhaps witnesses saw mirages of the Irish coastline reflected and distorted. Perhaps the perfect circular shape on maps represented how they tried to describe something that shimmered, that refused to hold a stable form, that looked almost solid but wasn't. But atmospheric mirages don't explain physical contact. Nisbet's crew claimed they anchored in measurable water depth. 3 fathoms, 18 feet. They claimed they rowed ashore, walked on solid ground, interacted with something there. Mirages don't have shorelines you can land on. They don't have structures you can approach. They don't have inhabitants who hand you objects. Unless what they encountered wasn't a mirage but something else, something that appeared solid, felt solid, but operated by rules that didn't match physical reality. The third theory, Hy-Brasil, existed and sank. Porcupine Bank sits exactly where some maps place the island. During the last ice age, sea levels were significantly lower. Land masses that were islands 12,000 years ago now lie submerged. Perhaps Irish coastal communities preserved memories of a real island that later vanished beneath rising seas. This explains the consistent cartographic placement. It explains why maps showed islands at coordinates now hundreds of feet underwater, but it doesn't explain the encounters. If Porcupine Bank was above water 12,000 years ago, it was already submerged by 1674 when Nisbet anchored there. It was underwater in 1684 when Ole claimed his visit. It was gone in 1872 when Westrop brought witnesses. Yet they described landing, walking, interacting with things on the island. Either they lied, all of them, across centuries, coordinating impossible details, or something appeared in that location that wasn't permanently there, something that manifested periodically, allowed physical interaction, then vanished without trace. Irish folklore says Hy-Brasil became visible once every 7 years. But reading the actual encounter reports, you don't get the sense of scheduled appearances. You get the sense of witnesses stumbling into something they weren't meant to find, something that existed adjacent to normal geography, something that overlapped with reality briefly, then withdrew. The accounts describe an island that behaved wrong, land that appeared and disappeared, inhabitants that seemed almost human but not quite, structures that existed but shouldn't. A place that occupied coordinates in our world while operating by rules from somewhere else. That's not folklore. That's something worse. Unlike Bermeja and Sandy Island, Hy-Brasil's mystery isn't simply about cartographic error. The island appears in folklore, in witness testimony, in multiple independent map traditions spanning 5 centuries. The accounts describe physical details, water depth, visible landmarks, inhabitants, wildlife. These weren't abstract myths, they were navigational reports. Yet no confirmed evidence exists that anyone actually reached Hy-Brasil. No artifacts were brought back. No independent verification confirmed Nisbet's or Ole's or Westrop's claims. The gold and silver Nisbet's crew allegedly received, if it existed, left no record. Modern satellite imagery and seafloor mapping show no islands west of Ireland at the historical coordinates. Porcupine Bank sits submerged. The Atlantic Ocean extends unbroken from the Irish coast toward North America. What would solve this? Finding geological evidence that Porcupine Bank was above water in recent centuries? Or finding proof the claimed visits were fabrications? Or discovering atmospheric conditions that could create mirages detailed enough, persistent enough, to explain the witness accounts? None of that evidence exists. Hy-Brasil remains unique among Phantom Islands. Most Phantom Islands disappeared when cartographers corrected errors or when explorers proved their absence. Hy-Brasil disappeared from maps in 1873, not because anyone proved it didn't exist, but because enough time had passed without confirmed sightings that cartographers lost faith in the reports. It was never conclusively disproven. It simply faded from official records while remaining alive in folklore, in historical accounts, in the gap between what people claimed to see and what modern science can verify. If it was a myth, it was a remarkably persistent one that fooled navigators for 5 centuries. If it was a mirage, it was one that appeared with unusual consistency across generations. If it was a real place, it left no trace except in maps and stories, and the testimony of sailors who swore they walked its shores. The island that appeared every 7 years stopped appearing. Whether it ever existed at all remains, like the island itself, obscured in mist. 3 islands, 3 impossible contradictions. Bermeja documented for 4 centuries with precise coordinates, yet the ocean floor shows no evidence it ever existed. Sandy Island confirmed by satellite technology and global databases, yet dissolved into water nearly a mile deep when scientists sailed there. Hy-Brasil, visited by sailors across 5 centuries who described its shores in detail, yet left no physical trace except maps and testimony. Each case forces the same question: what do we trust? The records that guided ships for generations, or the empty ocean we find when we finally look? The coordinates verified by independent cartographers, or the seafloor scans showing undisturbed sediment? The witnesses who swore they walked on solid ground, or the absence of any artifact proving they did? These mysteries reveal something more disturbing than missing islands. They expose how easily errors become permanent truth when everyone believes them. Maps copied from maps, each generation trusting the last, none verifying if the island actually existed. Databases inheriting centuries-old mistakes, propagating fiction into the satellite age as fact. The islands are gone from our charts now, but they're not gone from the historical record. And that record, detailed, extensive, verified by multiple sources, says they were there. Either we trusted false records for centuries, or islands can vanish without leaving evidence they existed. Both answers are impossible. One of them is true. If you've made it to the end, thank you. It means you stayed with the evidence, the questions, and the parts most people turn away from. If any of these mysteries stayed with you, leave a like so this story reaches the people who follow the frontier with us. Tell me which case pulled you in the deepest and which place you want us to investigate next. Some mysteries don't disappear. They wait for someone to come looking.